Good morning. We're here at the Cape Charles Museum. It is February the 5th, 2025, and this is the Cape Charles Museum's oral history video project, and today we are going to interview the president of the museum, John Griffith. So with that said, let's go ahead with the interview, and we'll ask John to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself.
Okay, I'm John Griffith, and I'm part of the Griffith family that's been on the Eastern Shore, Lower Eastern Shore, since the 1600s. And I'm 78 years old, and I was raised here, spent my childhood in Cape Charles and Chariton area, and I'm privileged to be the president of the museum.
Fantastic. Who were your parents and where did they live?
Well, my dad grew up here. He was one of the families here, and my mother from Denver, Colorado, and Mom and Dad met during World War II. They were both in California. He was trained to be a pilot for the Army, and she was trained to be a nurse, and they met and married in California. Soon after that, he was transferred to England, and he sent her here to live with his parents while he was overseas. And a cute little story is, she came in off the ferry, and my aunt, Virginia Lee, met her at the ferry and took her to their home, which at that time was in what's now Bay Creek, Hollywood Farm, and she said when she got there, she wanted to get back on the ferry because she was coming from Denver, Colorado, a big city, to a house with no indoor plumbing. And she talked for a long time until she passed away about having to go to the bathroom at night with a flashlight and a pair of shoes.
So that was, you'd say your grandmother lived, was it your grandmother that lived?
Grandmother, grandparents, yeah, Burley and
Farm?
Essie, yes, they lived in a house on the Hollywood Farm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, it was. I don't remember that. They were out of there by the time I was old enough to know where they were. They lived out the road close to where we were. But yeah, that's where she went. But they made her feel very much at home as part of the family, and she eventually became a Cape Charles person. And my wife was the same way. When we got married, soon after that, I had to go in the Air Force, and she stayed with my grandparents, Burley and Essie, again, the same way my mother did, and she became part of the family as well. Just the way those two people were.
That's nice. Where did you first live?
Well, the first place I remember was a house here in Cape Charles. I'm not sure which house it was, because soon after that, my dad bought a house on Bender's Row, and we moved out there in the early 50s, probably 49 or 50. After my brother Dave was born, he was born in 49, and we lived there until 1957. Dad, when he came back from the Army, the Air Force, sold life insurance in Cape Charles, but in 1953, he and Granddaddy Burley, they bought Lloyd's restaurant and renamed it Griff's, and Dad ran that. He ran that for a year, and he tragically passed away in there before he was 31 years old, and left my mother with 4 little children, my brother, brother Dave, my brother Bruce, and my sister Sandy, who was 10 days old at that time. And we lived on Bender's Row until 1957, and Mama sold that big house and moved us into Chariton for a couple of years. And Griff's restaurant, after Daddy died, was run by my Aunt Virginia Lee and Uncle Herbert. They lived upstairs. There was an apartment over top of that store. And they did that for a while, and then he got a better job somewhere else, and it was run by people in the family until 1969 when they sold it, and Griff's went away.
And for the folks that don't know, Griff's restaurant is the location where Frank Wendell has his window displays now.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of Griff's?
Oh yeah. Well, I in and out of there all the time. Especially before Daddy died. That last year, we were there quite a bit, in and out of the place. But yeah, I was in and out of there, and he sold magazines and models and things that I was interested in. So yeah, it was pretty good. And the restaurant itself became the place for the teenagers that Cape Charles went. because he had the jukebox, and it was where they went for the Coca-Colas and the jukebox and the afternoon things after school. So it was pretty nice. And a lot of people come and talk to me now about how they remember that. So it's some good memories.
When you say models, do you mean like model cars and airplanes and stuff?
It was a big deal for kids back in those days. I don't think it's a big deal like it is now, or was then. It's not now like it was then. But yeah, you got the models and put them together and paint them, and we talked about them as groups, and it was a good time.
Yeah, I was really into models when I was a kid. I absolutely loved them, model cars and whatnot. Let's see.
In 1957, we moved to Chariton, but in 1960, Mama got introduced to a sergeant from the Air Force Base through some friends of hers that were stationed down there. And Charlie Saderno became her next husband. And when that marriage came, she had 4 children. He had 5 children when they got married. And they bought what is now the Bay Haven Inn. In those days was the Wilson House. And they paid $25,000 for that house in 1961. It's worth a little bit more than that today, but a lot of people in there. Not only did they have those 9 children, but they had one soon after that, so it was a total of 10. And it was a little busy for me, so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents out on the farm. And I was over there 2 more years until I got out of high school and left anyway. But it was a house full of people.
Sounds like it. And when you say the Air Force Base, you're talking about
Cape Charles Air Force Station. Well, the Air Force Base was established after the Army left after World War II. And a lot of people lived there. We went to school with a lot of them. They came to Cape Charles to go to school. And the Boy Scouts had Boy Scout camp down there near where the administration building is today. And we got to know a lot of those people down there. There was a place where people could go and have a beer. The public could come into it, and had the NCO club. And like I say, it was quite a place, and it was a big shock to the community when they killed it, took it away, because a lot of people lived there, and a lot of people came to school there, and a lot of people were involved in the community there. So it was quite a jolt when they said, no, we're not going to do away with it, and they did. And now it's a wildlife refuge. So and I volunteered down there when I came back here, but it was quite something.
Do you have any other memories about living in the James Wilson house? I know you said it was a little crowded for you.
It was. Like I said, I only lived there when I was staying there just less than 2 years.
Okay.
And but the family was there in the house till 1969, and that's when Charlie got out of the Air Force, and they moved across the bay, got a job in Yorktown, and that's when they sold the house.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any memories of school and local businesses and that type of thing you could tell us about?
Yeah. Well, I started and finished in the same building, Cape Charles High School. Graduated in 1964, class of 14. Of course, we were the first baby boomer class, so it got bigger and bigger every class after that. But yeah, I had a lot of good friends there, and Cape Charles is unique in that you are not just friends with your class, you're friends with 2 or 3 classes before and after you. And it's a was a very tight-knit community in those days. Then they closed the school down here, of course, later years, and everybody went to Northampton, so it's a much bigger, wider group that people you knew. But in our day, it was pretty tight. We knew everybody right here in town. And even though I, for a couple of years, lived out of Cape Charles in Chariton, I still was very active with everybody else that I knew down here. So it was a good time. And being a small school like that, you really got to know everybody very, very well. My wife went to Granby with a graduating class of over 600. So she was having a hard time to understand for a lot of years how we got along so well and knew everybody in town like we did. And the stores downtown, in those days, the stores closed at 12 o'clock on Wednesday and stayed open until 9 o'clock on Saturday night, because that's when everybody at the community came to Cape Charles to shop, was Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening. And the movies were 50 cents or $1 a piece to go in those days. It had 2 movie theaters. So it's not like it is today. It's quite different. This is not the same Cape Charles it was then. The buildings are the same, but nothing else is. So it's good and it's bad. I have mixed emotions about it, but the town is thriving now. It probably would not have been if it wasn't for the people coming here. That's all we can do.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of any particular stores that you remember going to, or?
Well, the five and dime store. If you didn't work out somewhere else, you worked. I know several people worked in the five and dime store, at McCrory's 5 and 10 cent store, and of course Griffith was next door to that almost. But you bought your shoes and clothes and things here in Cape Charles that you can't do anymore. This was a community, self-sufficient community. And once the bridge tunnel came and things got bypassed, the railroad went down, it just became a different place. Really did.
Yeah. McCrory's, and that was just about next door, a door or two down from Griff's?
Yeah, it was Griff's and then Jones's department store and then McCrory's store from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But McCrory's, it was just... was it one retail building there?
No, actually it was three. It was under what is now the hotel. In those days was McCarthy Hotel. But there's three buildings together, and they made a walkway between those three buildings, even though they're Siamese buildings. The McCrory's had all three buildings, the three storefronts, I guess you'd say. And then from there on out, it was the hardware store, and then smaller stores down from that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Would you like to tell us about, when you got old enough to leave here, and
sure.
what you did, your career?
When I graduated in '64, I went to Danville Technical Institute for 2 years, and I got a degree in automotive technology, which today is kind of useless because things are not like they were in those days by any means. And afterwards, the telephone company offered me a job as a mechanic in Norfolk, and I took it. And after a couple of years, I met Ray, and we got married. And soon after that, Uncle Sam came knocking on the door in 1968, and that's when I went to the Air Force, and she stayed with my grandparents, as I said before. And eventually, she came to meet me, and we spent some time in Mississippi and in Oklahoma. And when I was discharged, we drove all the way back from Oklahoma to the Bridge Tunnel toll booth to find out that a ship had gone through it the night before we got there, and we couldn't get back to the Eastern Shore. So we stayed in Norfolk. And but the jobs in Norfolk were thin, and they asked me if I would be on the road a little bit and do some changes, various locations for telephone companies throughout the state, and C&P in those days. Went to Fredericksburg and then to Winchester. I was up there for a couple of months working. And they come and asked me, said, we're growing here, we need people, would you like to stay? So we moved to Winchester in 1970, late 1970. Spent the next 20 years up there. And then the job got surplus, and I wound up driving down to the city every day for 2 years, and that got real old real fast. And I asked for and got a transfer back to the Tidewater area, and wound up working at the naval bases. And I worked there until 2008. When I had bladder cancer and had to retire at age 61. And then we got that little bump in the road taken care of. And we bought a motorhome, sold our house, and Ray and I traveled around for a few years. Eventually, in 2010, we wound up volunteering at the Wildlife Refuge down here where the Air Force Base used to be. Stayed there 7 years, working in there, volunteering in there. And finally she says, it's time for a house again. So we got a house again and sold a motorhome because we both had issues that we just couldn't do anymore what we had been doing. So I had 42 years as a telephone man, and I would have stayed longer, but like I say, when your health goes away, you have to do what you have to do. Tell
us a little bit about what you did at the naval base.
I was a telephone technician for Dam Neck and Oceana Naval Research Station. 4,000 telephones to take care of on 2 bases.
Interesting.
I loved it.
Yeah.
In the 42 years, that was probably the best job I ever had. The good part was my boss would call the lady that I worked for on those 2 bases and say, how's he doing? She said, he's doing fine, so I'll call you next week. And so it worked out real well.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Working with limited supervision,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed probably the best job I ever had.
Yeah. So where you said that y'all had what was it, a camper or a
Motorhome.
motorhome? And you did traveled around some?
Yes, we did. We traveled. We got into the motorhome because Ray's mom and dad had a motorhome when he died in 1994, but he was in Montana when that happened. So we flew to Montana to get her mother in the motorhome, and to go from Norfolk to where we had to go to Montana took a day and a half traveling from airport to airport to get to where we could get to if they could come and pick us up. And we had him cremated and put in the river right there, and drove back, and she gave us that motorhome. That's how we got started. Well, we went through 5 of them, and the last one was a new one, 40-foot, which you could live in. If you're going to live in it, the bigger the better. And we did. We lived in it for 13 years.
Well, that sounds like a very interesting thing that y'all did.
It did. And we've been from in the East Coast, we've gone from Maine to Key West, and we've gone as far as Montana, and we've been to 44 states we've been in. And so that's over and done, but it was a good time. We got some good memories of that.
Did you work for any more of the park systems when you
I volunteered at the Wildlife Refuge at Cape Charles, the Wildlife Refuge down there, and we took 3 months in 2013, and we went to Texas. Spent 3 months on the border down there volunteering at a Wildlife Refuge. Things that I can say I did, but I wouldn't want to do again. On the border, on the river, is not a pleasant place to be sometimes. It's beautiful, but it's just not, especially in the last couple of years, it's really been something. We found people swimming across the river back in those days too, but not in the numbers that they have been up until now.
Yeah. What was the Eastern Shore National Wildlife Refuge like when you were working there?
It was
well kept.
It was well kept. They didn't really. The problem with that one down there is it's run by Chincoteague, and they don't really want to come down there as often as they should. So we wound up, like I say, stayed there almost 7 years, and I did a lot of things: cut grass, plowed snow, painted. Worked on the equipment, maintaining equipment, things like that. I really enjoyed that, I did. But like I say, it just got to the point where we decided a motorhome was not the place to live anymore. And it was, like I say, our health had deteriorated some, so we decided to move that, and we bought the house we own outside Sheridan now.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you've had some really great experiences y'all have in your lifetime. So when you settled down there in the Chariton area, at what point did you become involved with the museum?
I was in the grocery store one day, and I've known Bill and Jan Neville since I was a little boy. And Jan was in there, and I got to talk to him about a couple of things that I'd been in the museum, just stopped in to see it. And I said, I've got a couple of things they probably enjoy showing in there. He said, well, I'll take it and we'll put it in there. So anyway, I gave him some information about the bridge tunnel and some things of the day that opened up. I got the newspaper the day it opened and things of that nature. And eventually I came back in, and they said they needed docents. Well, I wasn't doing much else, so I decided I'd be a docent. And I've been a Saturday docent here in the museum, I think 9 years now. I did that before we bought the house. I've come Saturdays, and I've done the Saturdays ever since.
For about the last 9 years?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
6 years as president and a couple of years before that, and I think it's been 9 years.
Wow.
But I thoroughly enjoy being a docent here because I love talking to the people, and because I do have knowledge of the area now and before, how it used to be. It's interesting to talk to people and tell them, well, this is how it was, because some of the stories you hear when they come in are unique. Things that are not really, I have to straighten them out, let's put it that way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Do you have any early memories of being here at the museum? Any, like, people you worked with? Or
Well, I knew it was here But up until 96, when we weren't here, I left here, like I said, 1964 and didn't move back here until 2010. So this was a working place building when I was a kid. We
Right.
ride bikes out here in front of it, and the place would vibrate in the ground as these big things behind us were running. And I didn't realize it had been shut down, to tell you the truth, till I got back here and didn't think much about it. But it was quite a place. You could always tell when it was running because that big stack out back would be smoke roaring out of it with these diesels running in here. And then, like I say, the ground would just vibrate to let you know they were running. But as far as I never came in here, obviously it was a working place, so it wasn't open to the public by any means.
So at the end of its use, it was run by Delmarva Power. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. By that time, it may not have been Delmarva. It may have been A&M by that time. I don't know. I don't know when that change happened.
I think I read in our timeline that it was still Delmarva Power.
Could well be.
Yeah.
I doubt it was used much toward the end because electricity had gotten good enough they didn't need it.
Yeah. That's so interesting that the ground would vibrate because this place had two generators in here then.
We're sitting where the second one was, right here. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
I knew people that worked in here. Harry Lewis, one of the boys that I graduated with, his dad worked here for years. And there was a couple other people that I know, a name I can't bring up right now, but they were in here for years. Jack Hickman, I think, was one. His picture's on the wall over here.
Okay. Yeah. Did you know any of the men that worked for the railroad?
My Uncle Charlie worked for the railroad. He and my Aunt Margaret eventually ran Chalmers Antiques.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I didn't know he worked for the railroad.
Yeah, he worked. He came here to Pennsylvania to the Army base in World War II, and that's where he met my Aunt Margaret, and they got married. And he worked for railroad after he got out of the Army. But he hurt his back probably in the 50s and couldn't work anymore, had to retire early. Mm-hmm. And he and Margaret got into antiques and had the antique store here in Cape Charles, Chalmers.
It's a very well-remembered and cherished place.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was quite something. He had the antique store itself, and then next to that he had the antique store. So he had the antique store where he sold antiques, and then next to it was well, we've got a lot of the antiques out of there. The country store restored with all the antique things in there, but that was not for sale. That's for show.
Okay, so he had the space where he sold antiques, but then he had like set up as an actual. And
the antique store was in one place, and next to it was the antique store. General store, antique general store.
And that was all displays.
Oh yeah, there was nothing for sale in there.
Interesting.
Yep.
I wonder if how did he finance that? I wonder.
I honestly don't know. Probably in those days, what he bought in there didn't cost very much. We're talking late 50s and through the 60s is when they did this. Now, of course, a lot of that stuff became more valuable as time went on. But I'm sure he maybe went to antique markets or flea markets or something to buy a lot of that stuff. I really don't know. Because the majority of that was done when I wasn't here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if he's sold enough antiques. I mean, they were a lot more popular in the past, actually, than they are now.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about how he sort of financed being able to have the display space, He must have done fairly well with the antiques.
He also sold guns and coins and traded in coins and things like that too.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He did that. Margaret didn't do that part of it, but Charlie did. And then he passed away. I think it was in 1990, and she passed away in 2000, 2001, something like that. And the store was sold.
Okay, but they ran the store up until their death.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Sure did.
I found what was it, Lily Pinkerton or whatever, Pinkham or something that had those tonics, And there's a little book over there in the country store collection that has Margaret's. It was her book. It has her name in it.
With beautiful handwriting.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did. But she was. They were both active in the museum in those days.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Well, what did they volunteer?
I honestly don't know. I just hear people talk about them having been in here. When the museum started, I guess they got a lot of local people to help get started. Cape Charles was a tighter knit place in those days than it is today, for sure. And they knew a lot of people, but it wasn't the town like those days. There was more people that were here than come here's, I guess the way to put it. But
right,
it was still full of people you knew. In those days, you knew everybody lived everywhere, and people come in here and they say, "Well, I now bought the house at such and such Monroe Avenue." I said, "Well, that's not your house. That was the Smith house in those days." And, "Oh, you know about this?" "Yeah, I know a lot about those things like that." So yes, yeah. But it was just totally, just a different place in those days. It's not the same anymore, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when folks come in to visit the museum, you're able to sometimes give them a little history on their homes that you remember.
If it's one that I know who lived in it, yes. Actually, it's kind of funny. Back in those days, you didn't really think about what the address were of people. They just lived down the street, so if they can tell me exactly where they were, then I can say, I think I know who lived in that house in those days. But here again, it's been a long, long time ago, and honestly, my memory is not as good now as it was in those days by any means. But yeah, it's good. My grandparents had the farm where the YMCA is today, and when he passed away in 1968, grandmother sold that farm, moved into Cape Charles to 209 Monroe Avenue. And at 207 Monroe Avenue was Captain Ernest Ewell, which his boat, he was the captain on the Pocahontas, and he retired the day the British Tunnel opened. He'd been going back and forth across the bay for 45, 50 years, and to listen to him tell the stories about those would scare you to death, some of them with the weather and things. But a cute story about that is every night they would have dinner together, and she would put on a nice dress, and he would wear a tie, and he'd come over, and they'd have dinner, and they'd watch the car go by on Monroe Avenue in those days, back in this would be in the late 70s. And one night he didn't show up. So and they were both in those days in their 80s. So she called over the house. He didn't answer the phone. So she went over to the house and went in the house and couldn't find him, called him. Well, all those houses in that area there are built, the basement's on the ground and the house is above that. There's 8 and 10 steps to get into the house and that through there. Well, his laundry was in the basement. So eventually she opened the basement door and heard him moaning in the basement. So she called down, and they were Captain Ernest and Miss Essie. That's the way they talked to each other. So, "Captain Ernest, you down here?" "I am, Miss Essie." What happened?" "Well, I fell and hit my head." "Well, I'm coming down to help you." "You can't do that, Mrs. Essie." "Why not?" "I'm in my underwear." This is how people were, especially the older ones in those days. And it wasn't long after that his daughter decided that he had to leave and go live with her. And he didn't last too long about that, so we missed him a lot. But he was a unique person. He had a boat in the backyard on a trailer, but he couldn't go by himself. So every time I came home, my brother came home, so we'd have to take him fishing in his boat.
Oh.
So it was a good time.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's the type of people who lived here in those days. That had been here, even though Grandma Essie did not live in Cape Charles until Granddaddy passed away. They lived on a farm somewhere, but it was always lower Northampton County. So she knew a lot of people in town. She was a member of the Baptist Church in Cape Charles and things like that. So it was like I say, just everybody just knew everybody in town. And, if you were a kid, you did something bad, your parents knew it before you got home. So people say that's unique, but it's true in a lot of places, I think, especially a tight-knit small community like this.
Yeah, we visited your family graveyard last year in early spring, I think it was, and that's Capeville area.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've forgotten now who was buried there.
Well, that particular graveyard we went to there, where the old homestead used to be, was the ones buried in the backyard are my great grandfather's grandparents. It's a double gravestone there with both the names, John and Elizabeth. And I think the latest, she died in 1807, and that was probably 30 years after he passed away. So it's old stuff there. And,
very old.
But there's several other graveyards that I know down there. The Methodist Church down there has several Griffiths in there. And there's a graveyard in the middle of a field down there that has a brick wall around it. That it has some even older than that. I'm not sure what the dates are. I have to do some research, but they're early 1700s, most of them.
Wow,
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, was one of your Griffiths the one that lived all the way at the very southern end?
There on the old plats is a Griffin.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Well, but in those days, we have. If I look back through the history, there are people. Sometimes they said Griffin, sometimes they Griffith, because, and I have that problem today. People know that, or people do that. They so I think they probably were one of our relatives. I don't know why somebody named Griffin would be amongst all the rest of Griffiths right there. And they've done in. So I'm pretty sure it was one of ours, but I don't know who he was.
Yeah. Interesting.
And if you look through, I tell another cute stories. I tell people that I went to Norfolk to get a wife to increase the gene pool on the Eastern Shore. And the reason for that is if you look through my history, and I've got many pages of it, every local name in Lower Northampton County is in that history book. So if you go to marry somebody locally, you say, "What's your history?" So it's common in those days. My granddaddy grew up in Capeville, and grandmother grew up in Seaview, and they were connected by the Seaside Road in those days. That's all there was to get down there, which was a dirt road. They were married in 1919. He used to talk about taking a horse and buggy to go court her. Now, how they met, I don't know, because that was a long way apart back in those days. I never asked how they did that. But eventually they got married in 1919, and here's my lineage right there.
Maybe they saw each other at whatever local store was, on those roads back then, or at a church or something like that.
He was Methodist and she was Baptist.
Okay, well, that shoots that.
Yeah, it does. But I really don't know, and if I had thought about it when I was growing up and they were still alive, I would love to have asked them, but I did not, and there's nobody around now to ask.
We never think about asking all those questions.
No, you don't.
Until the folks are gone.
You're exactly correct.
That's why this oral history project of ours is so important, that we interview everybody we can that grew up here. We interview other people that lived here for short periods of time too, but it's just really important to ask all these people the questions now, so they'll be recorded and be here for future generations to learn from.
I understand.
Yes. Do you have any other stories you'd like to tell?
Well, no, I some I can't tell, especially with us kids when we were younger. But yeah, it's just the idea that growing up here was a privilege. And I have fond memories of growing up here, and that's why I'm back. When my wife and I were married in Cape Charles in 1968, and she said at that time, she says, "I hope you're not planning on living here when we get later on." I said, "Well, we'll see about that." So it took her probably 40 years or more to agree with that, especially when the city got to where it was just too thick over there. She was a Norfolk girl, grew up over there, and she was used to the city, but over there is different now too. It's like this all the time. So when it came time to settle down a little bit, I said, "Well, we're going to Eastern Shore." She said, "Let's do it." Because she had been accepted over here, and she knows a lot of people over here now. They know her, and it's worked out real well. Our daughter has now moved back here with her children, so they don't live with us, thank goodness, but they are here, and she married a Navy guy, and they've been all over the place. So it's kind of nice when they finally moved back. And we said, "Oh, you going to come live with Eastern Shore?" She said, "Well, you and Mom are getting old. You're going to need the help, so I need to be here." So I said, okay, so it worked out pretty well.
Great. It's kind of full circle then.
Yes,
everybody in the family is back here now.
I am the oldest Griffith left, and my brother Dave and myself had girls. And I have another brother up in Vermont. He has boys, but they've never been to the Eastern Shore.
Really?
No. not since they were babies,
Uh-huh.
but they have their own lives up there, and they don't consider themselves Eastern Shore people because they had no connection to us really. And so we just kind of come to the end of things. even with the girls, they've all been married and got children, but none of them are Griffiths. They have different names.
Yeah.
So we're kind of at the end of the line here.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention, how much the museum appreciates your service all these years as not only a volunteer, but now in the past 6 years as the president. And the museum is approaching its 30-year anniversary in 2026. So it was first the Cape Charles Historical Society, and then they were able to, I guess, purchase this.
It was given to them.
It was given. Okay, that part I couldn't remember.
The power company, as I understand it, was going to tear the building down and scrap the generators and things. And somebody could ask them if they would just give it to the Historical Society, and they did. And they, of course, they took one of these generators out of here to make room for all the exhibits that you see in here right now, but left that one. And that is a centerpiece, because when it's warmer and we can run it, right now the oil is sticky, it makes too much noise to run it now, but people walk in here and want to see that, want to see it go. And even though it's noisy when we're playing with it or running it with the electric motor, it doesn't run on its own, it's fascinating to everybody. So I'm certainly glad they kept it, because other than that, it would be just a big box with exhibits in it with nothing. But that's something to show.
It is, and it's something tangible that people can say, okay, this was an electric plant, and here's an artifact from it. So it took a few years for the Historical Society to do some necessary work on this place. And then the museum finally opened in 1996. And then when they decided to pull the railroad tracks and kind of dismantle what was left of the rail yard, the museum volunteered to take rail cars.
That's a nice way of putting it. They just said, if you don't take them, we're going to scrap them. So I guess you can say they volunteered to take them, yeah. And we were lucky in that respect. We got an engine. It'll never run because it's been cannibalized to keep the other old pieces of junk they had running. But it still looks nice. We had it painted last year. We've got 2 other cars from the last version of the Eastern Shore Railroad, which was called the Bay Creek Railroad. The railroad, the engine, the tank car, and the box car came from there. The other 2 cars that we
Bay
have,
Shore.
No, it was called Bay Creek. Oh, well, I guess it was Bay Shore. Yeah. Anyway, whenever Bay Creek ran, they owned the railroad, had the railroad running as well.
I see.
But it was the last version of when they're all painted blue and white. So we got those. And of course, we had the baggage car, which was a RF&P Railway Express car when it was running. It's from the 20s, and we can use that for storage. And then the caboose, I'm not sure where they got it, but it'd been around a long time. And last year we came up with enough funds to paint some of those things. We painted the engine and the box car, or the Railroad Express car, and the caboose. And they all look very nice now, pretty up pretty. And we're getting a lot of people coming just to see those too.
And so with the completion of the painting and some refurbishing, the caboose is open to the public.
It is.
With like a self-serve type of tour.
We give them the key to the door. And we had a platform and steps built up for it last summer. And it's very easy, accessible. Children love to get in there and see it. So we're kind of proud of that one.
It was Bay Coast Railroad.
All right.
I knew something I was saying, and I was like, this doesn't sound right.
So that's
Yeah, Bay
Yeah,
Coast
Bay something.
Railroad. It's terrible how quickly you can forget
Oh
things
yeah,
like that.
it is. It is.
And then we also have the wheelhouse or the pilot house, whatever people tend to call it, from the Captain Edward Richardson railroad barge over here on the side of the museum.
Mm-hmm. We had that painted last year, so it looks like it did. I'm not sure what we're going to wind up using that for. Right now, it's just to look at. It would cost a pretty penny to fix it up inside again, and we had talked about making that accessible from the museum itself, just walk out to it. I don't think that's feasible. We'd have to knock out part of the wall and build a walkway, and it's just not going to happen like that. I think we may eventually have some kind of special exhibits in there and open it just for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably what will happen.
Yeah.
But I just don't think we can leave it open to the public all day, every day, because we can't monitor it from in here.
Yeah.
So it's a nice exhibit. I mean, it's nice to show people and tell them, especially we look at this model right here behind us, and you show them that that's what it is right there, right off the bars. That's it right there. So, but we've got it, and we'll eventually do something with it.
Yeah, I'm going to include some video or footage or photos of that in this interview too. So, yeah, we've been talking about some things, some fundraising ideas, and there's a lot of folks that love that whole industrial thing, like what this building is. So, who knows? Maybe we might open it up to folks that want to have an industrial wedding or something like that.
We could do that
in here.
Yeah, certainly good.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
I don't know. I just the idea that, like I say, it was a privilege to grow up here, and not in a big city where we knew everybody and everybody got along well. It was just there wasn't. I don't remember any major problems growing up at all. There was very little crime, and there's not a lot now. But it's just the idea that we were isolated over here for so long. And in those days, you wanted to come to Cape Charles because you came to visit somebody, because Cape Charles was not a destination place for visitors. People who did come here on the train were usually coming to get the ferry to keep going south or to go north, whichever. The jetty had railroad tracks on it where the train would pull out there to switch and go back north. There was 2 sets of tracks in those days, a north and southbound track. So there's a lot of history here that people just don't know, and I'm glad they come in here, and I am very happy to share that history with people. And I've had some people come back to me later and say, it was interesting. I'm glad I came here, and that's why the museum is here, to tell people about the history of Cape Charles, and we're proud to do it. Today, we have a pretty good crowd come through here. There's thousands of people a year come through this museum. And I'm glad they do, because they learn about the town, and they seem to enjoy coming to the museum. The reviews I've read online about the museum, people enjoy coming here. They like what we have to show, and they learn about Cape Charles. And so a lot of people in Cape Charles today that don't know about Cape Charles because they haven't wanted to know, or they haven't tried to learn, or they just haven't gotten here to talk to us about it yet. But I have people who come here and say, well, somebody told me to come and talk to you because you seem to know what you're talking about in the museums. And that's nice.
Well, in the past couple of years, we've tried to implement some new programs, like the lecture series, to try to offer more to the community. And I think it was the right time for us to do that. We had record crowds of people come and attend our lecture series.
True.
And we try to concentrate on Cape Charles and the lower shore, and provide something interesting for the public to learn about here, and and interact with questions. And we've had a book signing by Janine Hull, and we hope to do more interesting things this season. And so the museum's very grateful for your service all these years. And so thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
interviewing.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you.
Right.
Okay, here is a model of the Captain Richardson railroad barge, and you can see the little pilot house or wheelhouse, as they call it, in the center. And we actually have that pilot house. It's on the side of the museum. It's been sandblasted and painted. But this rail barge would back up to the rail dock, and the rail cars would be loaded on here, as you can kind of see on the model.